Hi everyone, Alex here. In this video, I'm excited to show you 25 Excel tips and functions that I think will save you a ton of time. Be sure to use the timestamps below to jump to any section that interests you, and without further ado, let's dive in. Number 1, wildcards. Wildcards are extremely powerful when you're working with text in Excel. There are 3 different ones that I'm going to talk about today, starting off with the question mark. The question mark allows you to match any single character in a piece of text. For example, Smith with a question mark in the middle there would match both Smith with an I and Smith spelled with a Y. The asterisk is similar, but instead of just one character, it allows you to match any number of characters. For example, asterisk east would be able to match both northeast and southeast. But what if your text has a question mark or an asterisk built into it? Well, you can use the tilde to escape that and essentially mark it in front of it so that you can still match for question marks and asterisks or even a tilde. For example, FY06 tilde question mark would be able to find FY06 question mark. And if you want to take a look, you can see some other examples in this table below. So let's take a look at a real example here. I've got a simple table of, let's say, a menu at a restaurant that I run, primarily pizza and pasta, and just simple items and prices. If I want to really easily see the count of how many pizzas I have on the menu, I can leverage wildcards. So if I want to find the count, instead of just using the count function, I'm going to use the COUNTIF function, which is the same thing, but it allows you to add a condition. So I want to see the count of all of my items, and specifically, I want to match anything that has pizza at the end of it. So to do that, I'm going to simply add an asterisk at the start, and then write the word pizza with quotation marks, and bracket, and press enter. So we got 4, and Excel tried to be smart by creating a calculated column automatically, so I'm going to get rid of that. But that was super easy, and I can copy that and do the exact same thing for pasta as well. So instead of pizza, I'm just going to replace it with pasta, and press enter. Again, Excel did the calculated columns, but now you'll see that we have 4 pizza and 3 pasta, really easily just using the asterisk pizza wildcard. Number 2, importing data from an image on your clipboard. I love this one because it's super convenient and very powerful. Let's say you're browsing the web and you come across an image that has some neat data in it that you want to manipulate in Excel. Well, you can simply right-click the image, copy it, go to Excel, click on the Data tab, and then click on From Picture and Picture from Clipboard. Excel will analyze this image and prepare the data so that you can easily insert it into a sheet, and it'll be properly delimited, have the same headings, and is honestly quite surprisingly accurate. I will note that you do have to be a bit careful where the text is in the image because Excel can't easily tell what text should be in a cell and what shouldn't. So in this example, you'll see there's table 1 and all these numbers to the side. Let's see how it handles it. Again, we go to Data, From Picture, Picture from Clipboard. Excel will analyze and prepare. Once it's done, you'll see there's a few red marks here because it isn't exactly sure how it should set things out. So you can review that and you can change them. ID1 will accept that, X1 will accept that, and we'll insert it. So it did do pretty well here, but you do have to be a little bit careful on the data that you're importing. Number 3, importing data from websites. If you come across a website that has a table on it that has data that you're interested in, you should definitely try importing it via the website function on Excel. All you have to do is copy the URL, click on the Data tab, click on the From Web, paste in the URL, wait for a few seconds, and Excel will actually parse the page and pull out the tables that it can find. In this case, we're looking at the FIFA World Cup page. I'd like to get the results of all the World Cups, and I would like to load the data. Clicking Load will extract it from the website. It'll automatically create a new tab for you at the bottom, and you'll have the data pasted in here. I will note that you do have to do a little bit of cleaning. For example, you might want to delete these 2 top rows, but in general, it has all of the data here, and you can sort it in any way that you want. Number 4, Sparklines. A sparkline is a tiny chart in a worksheet cell that provides a visual representation of data. You can use sparklines to show trends in a series of values right beside the data for greatest impact. Inserting sparklines is easy. All you have to do is select the empty cell at the end of a series of data, click on the Insert tab, navigate to the right, and click on the sparkline. There's line, column, or win-loss. In this case, I'm going to choose line. All you have to do is select the data range, in my case B2 to G2, and press OK. Now we've got an easy little sparkline which we can drag down to autocomplete to see what our data looks like at a glance within a cell easily. Number 5, Goalseek. If you know the result that you want from a formula, but you're not sure what the input value needs to be to get that result, you can use the Goalseek feature. Another way to think of it is an algebraic solver when one of your variables is unknown. In this simple example, let's say I have 4 exams that I need to write over the year, and I want to get a final grade of 70%. So I want my average of all 4 of the exams to be 70%. The question I have is, what would exam 4 need to be so that it brings that average up to 70%? Now, of course, you could solve this yourself, but if you want to quickly solve this in Excel, you can click on the Data tab, go to the What If analysis, and click Goalseek. Goalseek allows you to pick a cell, the set cell, which is what do you want the value to change. So in this case, I want final grade to change from 63% to 70%. Remember, since it's a percent, I'm going to write 0.7. And the cell that I want to change is exam 4. I want to know what that has to change to get it to 70. So if I hit OK, Excel will actually solve this by guessing and checking different values, and it'll put in there that 90% is the grade that I would need to get. Number 6, conditional formatting. You've probably seen some fancy sheets that automatically update their colors based on what the values are in the cells. This is super simple to do with conditional formatting. Let's say we have a list of exam scores, and we have a key that tells us anything above a 50% is a poor, anything that's above a 75% is okay, and anything above 90% gets an excellent rating. Let's say we want to do this with conditional formatting. I'll select my exam scores, I'll click on conditional formatting in the Home tab, and then I'll add a highlight cell rule for a greater than value. Instead of hard coding this to 50%, I can also just select this cell here, which is D7. So now that it's highlighted, anything above 50% is poor, and we'll do a light red fill with dark text. Next up, I'm going to add another rule, another greater than one as well, and I'll say anything greater than this one in the key, 75%, gets a yellow fill. And next up, I'll add finally the last one, which is anything greater than the key for excellent, which is 90%, will get a green fill with dark green text. Now you can see it's applied all of those rules properly, and we can even update these if we want. So let's say instead of this, we'll say anything above a 59% is okay. That's changed the range a little bit. Let's say anything above a 96% is excellent. We've changed it a bit there as well. So super easy, quick, and powerful. And do note that if there are multiple rules, it will basically look at them all and then apply the last one. So in this case, all of the ones are true for these numbers, but since that was the last one we added, that one trumps and it gets an excellent green rating. Number 7, transpose. Transposing is just a fancy word for rotating data from rows to columns or vice versa. All you have to do is select the data. For example, you might want these column headings to instead be row headings. Copy it, paste it via the special function, which is denoted here by the transpose T option, and paste it into the cell. So now you'll see that we formatted it slightly differently, but it may be better for the data depending on what you have. And note you can do this vice versa, no problem. One of the simplest features, but most powerful. Number 8, duplicate from cell above. Now this is a super easy hotkey, just Control D, which will allow you to quickly fill data from the cell above. You can really use this in 2 ways. For example, here there are a bunch of students with marks and I know they've all passed. So I can hit Control D and it'll copy the yes from the cell above down to the cell below. You can also do this to easily fill multiple cells. So if you have a huge row of data, all you have to do is hit Control D and it'll autofill it with the data above. Number 9, autofill. Arguably one of the most powerful features in Excel, the autofill feature allows you to fill cells with data that follow a pattern or are based on data in other cells. So what does this mean? Well, let's say we have a number 1. If we use the autofill function, which is clicking and dragging on the bottom right of the cell here, it'll simply fill with 1s because there's no pattern for it to detect. If instead we change this, and let's say we add 2, and we copy it here, if we do the autofill function, which is dragging at the bottom, it's seen a pattern to increase every number by 1. We can also do things like skipping by 2s. So 1, 3 would increase all of the odd numbers. And we can also use this with dates. So for example, it's smart enough to know that this is a date cell formatted as a date. And if we click and drag down here, it'll automatically increase all the dates by 1 day. We could also try to get a little bit fancy here and see if there's a pattern there that Excel can detect, and it actually can. So here it's skipping by every 4 days. So another cool trick is you can double click. So on the first column here, the data goes down to row 18. If we double click here, Excel will autofill all the way down here. But since it only had that based on the number 3, it didn't have any pattern to fill. If we wanted it to fill the pattern, we'd have to select them both and then double click, and then it'll increase by 2s all the way down to the bottom of our data. You can also autofill with equations. So here, I'm just doing 100 times B2. Instead of having to manually type that in, I can drag it down and it'll automatically adjust the referencing cell number to the new cell that you've autofilled. And of course, you can do the same thing. You can double click at the bottom to autofill all the way to the bottom. Number 10, removing duplicate data. One of the most common things that happens in large spreadsheets is having repeated rows of identical data. Fortunately, it's super easy to remove this duplicate data. So assuming this is formatted as a table, just remember you can hit Control-T to format your data as a table. All you have to do to remove duplicates is Alt-A-M, and then the Remove Duplicates tab will come up here. We can hit OK because we want to select everything. And Excel will automatically find the duplicate values. In this case, 5 were found, and it will remove them all so that we've got just our students and just their values with no duplicates. You can also do the same thing via the Data tab, via Data, and then remove duplicates at the top here. Number 11, DatedIF. DatedIF is a really powerful function if you're working with dates and especially the differences between them. It only has 3 arguments. So if we check it out, it'll have a start date, it'll have an end date, and it'll have the unit of difference that you want it to calculate. So in this case, I've got a column trying all the different permutations. In the first one, it'll display 4 years. It'll display the differences in months. Here's the differences in days. This is the difference in days, but ignoring months and years. So you can specify that with an M. Here's the difference in months, ignoring days and years. And then finally, this is the difference in days, ignoring years. Number 12, filtering. Let's say I have a large amount of data, and while I'm interested in it, I'm specifically interested in certain aspects of it. For example, maybe I want to see in these Formula One driver champions, only the Ferrari ones, or only the Mercedes ones. How can I easily do that? Well, this is where filtering comes into play. So the first step is to select all of your data with Control-A, move over to the Data tab, and then click on Filter. You'll see that it creates these drop-down buttons at the top headers, and these are what allow you to interact with and play with the data from a filtering perspective. So let's see, for example, all the Ferrari drivers like I said. If I set a filter of that, I'm immediately able to see just a view of that. Next up, maybe I want to further filter beyond that. You can actually combine multiple filters at the same time. Let's say I only want to see drivers from 2000, 2001, 2002. Well, now I've got multiple filters running. Number 13, pivot tables. Pivot tables are extremely powerful, and I could do an entire video on all the different functionalities that they provide. For this one, we'll just have a simple example. Let's say I want to take this data, which has all the Formula One drivers and their data and their corresponding championships, seasons, etc., and I want to make a pivot table out of it. Well, how do I do that? It's super easy. All you do is you select the data in the table, then you go to Insert, Pivot Table. You click on that. You can specify where you want the pivot table to be placed. In this case, I'm going to use my existing work table here under the Pivot Tables worksheet and click OK. There we go. Excel has automatically created the pivot table based on all of that data. And even though it's empty, you can see all the different fields that are supported here, and we'll play with them in a little bit. So let's say I'm interested in looking at different aspects of this data, different dimensions. For example, I might want to see how many wins each driver has had. Well, that's pretty simple. We can drag the driver down to the rows. These are all the different fields that the pivot table supports. Now we've got all the drivers in our rows, and then we can look for wins, and we can put the sum of values. This will easily sum up the number of times each driver has won, so that we can see Lewis Hamilton has won 68 and Sebastian Vettel has won 34. We can also do some other cool things like see how many podiums each driver has won, how many of the fastest laps they've achieved. Furthermore, we can do some things with filters. Let's say this is interesting and this is great, but maybe I only want to see certain engines or chassis types. Well, I can add a chassis to the filter, and then at the top here, I can easily say which chassis I want to see the results from. So for example, if I only want to see Mercedes, these are all the Mercedes drivers along with their sum of wins, podiums, and fastest laps. Similarly, I could look for Ferrari by clicking on Ferrari and hitting OK. And these are all the Ferrari drivers who have won, had podiums, and fastest laps. Number 14, slicers. Slicers provide buttons that you can click to filter tables or pivot tables. They're easily viewable, allowing you to see the current filtering state, and they make it super easy to understand what is currently displayed. So let's quickly make the simple pivot table that we had before, where we have the Formula One drivers and how many wins they've each achieved in the World Championship. Let's say we want to use a slicer. All you have to do is go to the Home tab, then you click on Insert, Slicer. Here, I might be interested in seeing which chassis for example, each driver has and filter based off of that. So you'll see Excel automatically created this box here where I can click on the different chassis types to see who was an Alfa Romeo driver, who was a Ferrari driver, who drove for Lotus back in the day, all those sorts of things. You can even hold Control to click multiple of them. Releasing Control will show that. And then you can clear all of it just by clicking that. It's also possible to add multiple slicers. So let's say the chassis is great. I want to insert another one, so I'll go to Insert Slicer. Let's do tires. So here we've got a second slicer, and I can say, okay, let's check out Alfa Romeo. Looks like they only use tire type P, tire type G. Let's check out Ferrari. Well, Ferrari has a couple different tires, so maybe I want to filter even more into that and see only the B tires that Ferrari drivers used when they won. We can see Kimi Räikkönen and Michael Schumacher used B type tires. You can combine multiple slicers to analyze your data in a nice visual interface. Number 15, the trim function. Trim removes all spaces from text except for single spaces between words. You can use trim on text that you have received from another application that may have some irregular spacing. For example, I have this list of Pokemon and their fighting types, but the Pokemon column and some of the fighting types are all messed up in terms of the spaces that I copied over. I can easily remove this just by using the trim function. I'll type equals trim. I'll hit tab to autocomplete. I'll select this A4 cell here, I'll close it, and then press enter. You can see that it automatically removes the space at the front, and we can easily autofill this all the way down, and all of our spaces have been cleaned up and removed. I'm going to go ahead and do this for the other column as well. I'll double click on the bottom there to autofill it down, and now we've got the clean data that if we want, we could copy and paste over by changing the paste to value, and then we have our clean data in the original table there, no spaces, no issues. Number 16. Clean. Clean is similar to trim, but instead of removing spaces, it removes all non-printable characters from text. You can use clean on text that you import from another application that may include characters that don't print. For example, here we've got some of these square blocks represented by char 7 there as well. And just by using equals clean A2, as you can see in this cell, it gets rid of those and cleans up all the text. This not only works for those kind of non-printable characters, but even line breaks as well. So for example, in A10, we have monthly report, but with a line break as well, and it cleans it up too. Do keep in mind that you can chain these together. You can clean the text and then trim it for really powerful results. Number 17, index and match. Index and match can be some of the most powerful functions in Excel, especially when you combine them together. So let's first look at them each individually, and then let's have an example of how you can combine them. First, we'll start with index. So typing index, we'll see that it says it returns a value or reference of the cell at the intersection of a particular row and column in a given range. That's a little bit of a mouthful, but we can see what it actually does with a quick example. All index does is it returns the value at a specified row and column in an array. So in this case, I'm going to make the array my entire table. I'm okay with that. And I want row 2 and column number 4. What's the value there at that index? Well, if I do that, we'll see that it returns 7,565 because counting from the top, we've gone to row 2, number 1, 2, and then we've gone to column 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's returned that value. Maybe in this case, I don't want all, so I'm going to adjust this so that's just the values in the table, just the data. In that case, 2, 4 will give us 5406 because instead we're starting from this number 2 here, so 1, 2 down, and then 1, 2, 3, 4 across. Gives us 5,406. Next up, we have match. So match is a little different than index in the sense that it returns the position of an item in an array that matches a specified value. So if I have a specific lookup value, in this case, let's say I want to look up 7,845, and the array that I want to use is this particular column, and match type 0 for exact, 1 for a fuzzy match. I'm going to use 0 for an exact match. This returns 8. So all that says is in this array that we specified, the value we were looking for is number 8. So how can we combine index and match to automatically grab any value given two specified inputs? Well, it's quite easy. Here we can see that we have a name as an input and a month. So for any particular salesperson and a month, we want to be able to automatically report the sales of that month. Well, let's start with using the index. We know we want to use index because that's what returns the actual value. So what do we want to use for our array or our input? Well, since we're using month and names as input, the actual values that we want to parse through are just going to be the dollar amounts here. We don't want to include the names on the left and the months on the top because those are actually going to be part of the lookups via the matches that we're going to do to get the row number and the column number. So we'll use that as our input for the array. And then for the row number, well, we can look at the rows on the left here and we know that they're the names. So that one we're going to do a match for, because we want the relative position of the name. The lookup value is going to be the name provided in the cell J2. The array is just going to be the list of names. So quite simple there. And then the match type, we're going to do an exact match. All right, so that will give us the name that matches. It'll return the value there. Now we can do another match again for the columns using exactly the same thing. The lookup value will be the cell above, so J3. The lookup array will be at the top here, and then we'll do an exact match as well. So now I'm going to close the brackets and we should be good to go. So now pressing enter, I got a value of 5,194. Does that make sense? Let's look. Force on February, 5,194. Okay, cool. How about Kyle? What did he do in February? 4,608. Let's double check that. Perfect. Let's make sure the month change works as well. I'll adjust my size there so we can see Kyle March. Perfect. So using index and match, even though the equation looks a bit complicated, if you go through how I built it, I think it'll make a lot of sense. Very powerful for looking up any value in a particular table. Number 18. Xlookup. You can use the Xlookup function to find things in a table or range by row. It's sort of the advanced version of VLOOKUP that's been introduced in recent versions of Excel, and unlike VLOOKUP, you can return multiple results at once, which I'll show you right now. So let's say we have the similar sales data that we were playing with in the index match example, and I want to use Xlookup. You can see that we can search through a range of an array to find the corresponding item from a second range in array. Let's say I want to look up the last name Little, and my lookup array, that's just going to be all of the names in here. And then my return array. So what results do I actually want? Well, I'm not 100% sure yet there, so I'm just going to select all of the price data and see what happens. You can see here that it returned 3 results. So this is the power of Xlookup. It returned all of the data from Little across Jan, Feb, and March. And if you think about it, that makes sense because the return array that we used was actually a table, not an array. So it had multiple results for Little. If instead of using that, we used just one of the rows, let's say February, it would return the corresponding result in February. Well, that's great. But what if we want to combine this all together? Let's see about using nested Xlookups to do a multiple column and row lookup. So in this case, we're looking up the name, but we're not using the month data at all. We can do that by using the return array and having that return the correct array in the month. So let's throw in another Xlookup here. The lookup value is going to be the month. The lookup array is going to be the list of months at the top, same thing as before. And now in this case, we can use all of the data in the return array because if you remember, the nested Xlookup inside will return all of the data for that particular month, but that's in a single array form. And then the outer Xlookup will consolidate that by looking at the name and it'll provide a single result if we did everything correctly. So let's double check this. Little in Jan returned 5,259. That looks good. Let's change it to March, 7,845. That looks good. Let's check out Brigley, 5,406 in March. Looks great. Number 19, if. If is a relatively simple function, but it's quite powerful. All you have to do is add some kind of logical test. So in this case, I'm going to check, do these grades pass a certain value? So we'll say 0.5 for 50% here. If that's the case, we'll return a pass string. If it's false, we'll return a fail string. It auto-filled all of the columns there, and you can see that the logic matches. So while if is very simple, it's very powerful and definitely a tool you should add to your toolbox. Number 20, SUMIF. SUMIF is a neat function because it allows you to add up certain quantities or numbers only if they meet a specified criteria. Here, I'm going to sum the range given a criteria that it matches my supplier name. So in this case, the range is the suppliers. The criteria is going to be right above. In this case, it's Alex. And the sum range is what I actually want to sum up. So I only want to sum these quantities if the supplier matches the criteria, which is Alex. So let's hit enter, and we've got 470 there, which is 200 plus 80 plus 190. So the math checks out. Number 21, SUMIFS. So similar to the SUMIF, we can use SUMIFS if we have multiple conditions that we want to sum on. So let's check it out. In this one, we start with the sum range first, which is a little bit different than SUMIF. And then we add the criteria range. So for the first criteria, I'm going to have the product. In this case, I only want tomatoes. So that's going to be my first criteria. And then criteria range 2 is going to be the suppliers. And I want the supplier listed above. And you can add, so on and so forth, as many criteria as you want. And what this says is only sum up the quantity if it matches the product specified in G1 and the supplier specified in G2. So if we hit enter, we get 390, and let's check if that makes sense. Alex had 200 tomatoes plus 190. That looks good. Alex also had some mushrooms, but it didn't include those, so we know it's working correctly. Number 22, upper, lower, and proper. These functions are great for manipulating text that might have some weird uppercases or lower cases. So let's try upper first. This converts a text string to all uppercase letters. In this case, I'm gonna do Greg. I press enter. Excel has automatically filled it out for me. Let's try lower. Similar, we'll do the same thing. Excel has automatically lowercased everything. And proper, probably the coolest one in my opinion. This will put them all into a proper format. So you can see that the first letter is capitalized of both names. Number 23, convert. So you've probably had a case where you wanted to convert some currency from something to another, maybe miles to kilometers, Celsius to Fahrenheit. Well, you don't have to look anything up. Excel has this all built in. So in this case, we just use the convert function. We click on the number we want, and then from unit, you can see there's a huge list of all the different things that Excel can convert for you. So there's a ton of stuff. In this case, I'm going to specify miles with the quotation MI, and then I'm going to look for kilometer just by doing the quotations KM. And I'll hit enter, and Excel has automatically converted all of these miles to kilometers. Number 24, stock data. But before we start, I would recommend converting your data to a table. So let's say you have a number of stock tickers. Convert it to a table just by hitting Control-T. This allows, I've found, the stock data function to work a little bit better. So if we go to data here, and now we click on stocks, we can actually see that it converted the MSFT ticker to Microsoft stock. Similar, we can do that for the ones below just by clicking on the stock button. And now we've got stock data for all of these ones. You'll see this little button appears at the top right. We can add all sorts of things that can be live updated. For example, I can add the price. Let's say I want to see what the price to earnings ratio is. Let's say I want to see the number of employees these companies have. Maybe I'm interested in where the headquarters are. So this is super cool, super powerful. Not only does it automatically generate this for you, but you can actually refresh it on the fly. So if this was during trading hours, you would see these things change. Number 25, geography. So very similar to stocks, the first thing we're going to do is convert it to a table. And once we've done that, we can click on the data tab and then click on geography. So just by clicking on that, it's automatically converted all of these country strings to the country data format. So now we can see a lot of cool things like area. We could see the currency code, for example. In this case, Namibia doesn't seem to have one. We could see gasoline price. We could see what's the largest city. And it'll sometimes be a little bit busy when you find it. And we can add all sorts of things like who the current leader is. Very powerful, very interesting. Another really neat feature with geography is that you can insert beautiful maps. So if you click on the Insert tab, and then you click on Maps here, you can add a filled map with the particular quantity that you have added there, and it'll shade it based on how strong that particular quantity is or how weak it is. So in this case, I have life expectancy per country, and you can see that countries with high life expectancy are darker, and countries with worse life expectancy are lighter. You can have different kind of formats for this, different kind of styles, and it looks very beautiful, clean, powerful, great for presentations. Well, there we have it. 25 Excel tips and functions that I think are extremely useful and will save you a ton of time in the long run. I hope you learned something, and if you did, please consider subscribing, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.